Hello everyone, in this video we would like to present our research project, which is the impact of economic growth toward income inequality in Malaysia. But before that, we would like to introduce ourselves. My name is Muhammad Bazli bin Jamil.
My name is Ana Batrisha Kroto Ain binti Mama Rahini.
Hi everyone, my name Melhaltis Anak Philip.
Hello, my name is Esrin Vivi, anak Thomas Tarang.
Assalamualaikum and hi. My name is Shazwani binti Ashri. I'm from BA 242 5B.
We start with introduction. Malaysia is the one most open economies in the world, with a trade to GDP ratio averaging over 130% since 2010. Income inequality in Malaysia is what always been concern to the government, as it directly influenced the employment rate. Income equality refers to the fact that different people earn different amount of money. Background of study. The government play an important role in a country's economic performance. They also monitor the economic growth and will make sure variables perform well. Economic growth may have a significant impact to income inequality, as both variables have a negative impact toward each other. Problem statement. In our research paper, they have a two problem of statement which is due to the limitation. The first one is the vast majority of the existing in the empirical literature on the effect of income equality on the economic growth does not measure the income inequality in a consistent manner. Second is the another potentially serious data problem that virtually all the previous empirical work examining all of the effect of the distribution on income and the expenditure on the economic growth that has failed to measure the distribution of income or expenditure in a consistent manner. For our research objective, first one is to identify whether income inequality affect the economic growth. Second is to examine the income inequality aligned with economic growth. And the last one is to examine the relationship between income inequality and economic growth as uses inequality data that are not consistently measured. For our research question for the study, we are questioning which is, for the first one is what effect will occur if there is inequality income toward the economic growth. Second, will economic growth reduce the income inequality? And the last one is inequality data that are not consistently measured be used to identify the relationship between the income equality and economic growth. For the last part is hypothesis development. Hypothesis development has two, which is null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Null hypothesis is economic growth and income equality have a negative relationship, while the alternative hypothesis, economic growth and income equality have a positive relationship.
We present about literature review chapter 2. How we want to know what we focus on economic growth. The best way to measure the economic growth is based on the GDP. This is because it will take to the account of the country in the entire economic output. Besides that, in GDP, it will include the goods and services of the business that produce for sale of that country. It doesn't matter whether the company or that country is sold in the domestically or overseas. Important in GDP is it will measure the final production. It will not include the part of the manufacturer to produce a product. It will include the export. This is because they produce the product in the country. Besides, the import will subtracted from the economic growth. Next is income inequality. It can be defined as a household disposable income in a particular year. It will consist of earnings, self-employment, the capital income, and public cash transfer. Income, taxes, and social security contribution will be paid by the household. Household income is due to adjustment by each of its members to reflect the variation in household needs in different sizes. There are a few factors that lead to income inequality, which is tax policy. Tax policy is the most important variable, which is country's tax policy with the tax structure. It will raise the economic growth in short term while supporting to the long term. Government revenue is rising, which is related to the lowest cases of income inequality. The next factor is unemployment. It is a major variable which is greatly increases the likelihood of the income inequality, as thus lower overall the participation of labor force. In anticipated income inequality theory, income inequality is the production of unequal income within a community. The less the distribution is equivalent, the greater the inequality of wealth. Inequality of income also comes with the unequal distribution of resources. In order to illustrate various levels and types of income inequality, such as income inequality by gender or race, communities may be separated. In order to analyze the scale of income inequality in population, different indicators including the Gini coefficient can be used. It is known as the extended form of classical theory and is the behavioral sciences to be incorporated with management. According to hypothesis, the organization is a social structure and the individual activities have an impact on the performance.
Today, I would like to present about data and methodology. What is methodology? Methodology can be defined as research methodology as a practical how of any piece of result, and it is about how study is systematically designed by investigator. Besides, it is to ensure that the result is valid and reliable. Research paradigm, methodology, and epistemology are creating a holistic view on how the knowledge is being built and on how we can see the relation to the knowledge and the methodological strategies is used to discover. Next is research design. Research design is referred to the overall strategy to carry out the research in order to make a conclusion. The main target of the research design is to the analysis to evaluate the relationship between inequality and economic growth. Next, conceptual framework. For conceptual framework, we are focused on three variables, which is economic growth, income inequality, and poverty. Next is data and sample selection. For data and sample selection, it will divide it into two parts, which is target population and sampling technique. For target population, it means the entire population or group that researcher is interested to researching and analyzing. This target population is defined by C.M. Plaza in year 2007. Based on our research, we are interested in generalizing to population of Malaysia, and we are focusing on Malaysia itself, and it might helping us in analyzing the research objective and the question. The next data and sample selection is sampling technique. Sampling technique make a subset of a big group of population to ease the research investigation. Based on the research, we are using a simple random sampling where every individual in the population has an equal chance of being selected. The next point is measurement, conceptualization, and operationalization of variables. For independent variables, they have one, which is economic growth. Economic growth, or real economic growth rate, is the rate at which a nation's gross domestic product, or known as GDP, are changes or grow from one year to another. Economic growth, also known as Y. Next is independent variables. In the independent variables, they have two, which is income inequality and poverty. For income inequality, unevenly income that distributed throughout a population, and the fact where different people earn different amount of income. Meanwhile, for poverty, poverty is a state or condition in which a person or community lack financial resources and essentials for a minimum standard of living. It means that the income level from employment is low that basic human needs can be met. Income inequality can be known as X1, meanwhile for poverty can be known as X2. Next is methodology and model testing. For the methodology and model testing, to achieve our objective, our group makes some analysis of the variable used, which is descriptive analysis, normality test, Pearson correlation coefficient analysis, variant inflation factor, and multiple linear regression. Descriptive statistics. The first step is to conduct statistical analysis, and it gives an idea of distribution of a data. By providing a simple summary of sample and method, it's used to conduct a research on the relationship between income inequality and economic growth. Next is correlation analysis. For correlation analysis, we are using Pearson correlation. It is to measure the degree between the variables. Commonly, it's used in linear regression as for us to use a multiple linear regression. In the table shows the relationship between variables that are based on the strength of the correlation. Lastly, regression analysis. For a regression analysis, our group using multiple linear regression in order to explain the relationship between income inequality, poverty, and economic growth.
Chapter 5: Findings and Discussion. Under this chapter, I am going to show and explain an empirical evidence of the relationship between income inequality and economic growth in Malaysia. The data consists of 31 observations, which is from 1989 to 2019. Data collection. I am going to remind again on the dependent variables and independent variables used in our research projects. There is one dependent variable, which is economic growth, GDP growth, and two independent variables, which are Gini coefficients, income inequality, and poverty rate. Descriptive analysis. We are doing descriptive analysis as to get measure of central tendency, measure of dispersion, and measure of normality. As we can see from the analysis, the data is not quite normally distributed. From the skewness, it shows that GDP growth and Gini coefficients skew to the left, but not that far from zero. But poverty rate skew a little to the right and also not far from zero. From the kurtosis, the data is not flat and that indicate of some shapes of histogram. I will explain more on the normality test later. The standard deviation are also less than the mean and that a good result. Normality test. This normality test is very important as we are able to know either our data is normally distributed or not. If not, there will be some reason. We are also going to use information from descriptive analysis. From the skewness or kurtosis test, for normality it shows that GDP growth skewness and joint column are below than 0.05. That means the data is not normally distributed. But it is different for Gini coefficients and poverty rate, as the value of skewness and joint column are above 0.05. That indicates the data is normally distributed. For GDP growth, the data is valid and GDP growth cannot be controlled as it can be affected by many factors. The data is acceptable. Figure 1. Normality histogram for GDP growth. From this figure, we can see that the data is skewed to the left and have a long right tail. This is exactly like have been explained before. There is no bell shapes likely to be seen, but there is a reason for this data to be acceptable. Figure 2. Normality histogram for Gini coefficients. From this figure, we can see there is some sort of bell shapes and quite normal. The data is little more to the left. This data is almost normally distributed and it is acceptable. These data are based on populations. Figure 3. Normality histogram for poverty rate. From this figure, we also can see there is a bell shapes but not perfectly distributed. The data are skewed a little to the right. This data also based on population. The population are volatile which can change over time. This data also acceptable. To get a better result, we also do Pearson correlation coefficients to identify the relationship between the variables, especially GDP growth, which is the economic growth, and Gini coefficient, which is income inequality. From table 6 correlation between variables, we're able to conclude the result based on table 1, which is the interpretation of the correlation coefficient that are based from Hussein et al. 2014. From the result we get, it shows that the correlation between GDP growth and Gini coefficient is 0.7587, which indicate a strong positive relationship. Same goes to GDP growth and poverty rate. From this, we're able to conclude that we are going to reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. There is a positive relationship between economic growth and income inequality in Malaysia. As to support the previous result, we also conduct hypothesis tests. From table 8, we are able to see that p-value is smaller than significance value alpha, which is 0.05. This means that we are going to reject the null hypothesis and conclude the alternative hypothesis, which the economic growth and income inequality have a positive relationship. Before going into regression analysis, we are conducting variance inflation factor (VIF) test to detect is there multicollinearity in our data, but the result shows that there is no multicollinearity in our data. After that, we are doing heteroscedasticity test, and the result is there is heteroscedasticity in our data. Therefore, we are conduct robust in order to adjust our data. The final analysis is regression analysis. From table 10, multiple linear regression, we're able to see that our data is significant as the significance f is equal to 0 and smaller than the critical f. This means we can proceed doing the regression. R square indicates 65% of the proportion of variance for dependent variable explained by the independent variables. The p-value for each variable is lower than 0.05, which means the variables is significant. The equation form shows that there is a positive direction between variables. Based on the overall result, we are able to conclude that there is a positive relationship between economic growth and income inequality in Malaysia.
Chapter 5 Conclusion. In this chapter, it includes the conclusion and recommendation for the research. There will be the discussion of some limitation of study and recommendation that future researcher can learn in order to improve their research of the same topic. The overall result and analysis from chapter 4 will be summarized as to get a clear conclusion. For the summary finding analysis, we did answer all the three objectives. For the result based on hypothesis testing on objective 1 is income inequality has an effect toward the economic growth. For the second objective, economic growth and income inequality move at almost the same direction. Lastly, economic growth and income inequality have a positive relationship and impact with each others. There are limitations of study. First, time constraint. The time given to complete the research is too short. It needs a longer time in order to finish this research, as there is the need to collect all the data or the information to get an accurate result. Next, lack of previous studies. It is an important thing to have a lot of reference, as it can assist researchers to identify and analyze the research area. Literature review is an important part that needs to have some of the previous study support. Lastly, limited data. Based on our study, the data is very limited and difficult to find. A valid data is very important in order for to make a detailed analysis and get a better result. We need to find the data one by one for each year, and this is regarding towards the Gini coefficient and poverty rate data. For the recommendation, the research is focusing on one country, which is Malaysia. The period of data collection is 31 years from 1989 to 2019. In this research, we only use three variables, which is one independent variable and two independent variables. After that, the future researcher can do the same method for the other country, and there is no limitation in choosing country as long the data is available. The researcher should conduct the same study that have been done by the previous researcher. From that, the researcher can get some idea and it will assist them in achieving their objective. For the conclusion, the study find that the impact of economic growth toward inequality in Malaysia. This means that any movement of the economic growth will influence.
We have now come to an end of our presentations, and as I can conclude, based on research project, what we have found that uh, economic growth and income inequality does have a positive relationship in Malaysia, which the economic growth have an impact toward income inequality reductions or the growth of income inequality. And that's all from us. Thank you.